In 1958, a wordsmith named Frank Waters journeyed into the elevated wastelands of northern Arizona, where he sat in the company of Hopi elders for a span of years, not a handful of weeks, nor a solitary interview, but multiple annual cycles. Laboring in tandem with a Hopi linguistic mediator, Oswald White Bear Fredericks, Waters compiled accounts that the broader global populace had never been granted authorization to hear in their entirety. What emerged from those dialogues crystallized into one of the most exhaustive external chronicles of Hopi cosmic philosophy ever collated. Concealed within that body of witness was a portent. The elders spoke of an azure celestial body, not yet visible in the firmament, that would eventually manifest. Upon its arrival, they asserted, it would signify a pivotal juncture, a beacon that humankind had arrived at the brink of an irrevocable decision from which there could be no retreat. Waters transcribed it precisely as it was conveyed. He refrained from framing it as allegory, and neither did the elders who uttered it. Should this constitute the type of inquiry you have sought, kindly subscribe now and remain with me, for the authentic utterances of those elders have never been subjected to proper scrutiny by any individual possessing the credentials to undertake such an examination. Now, here is the nuance that the majority of reportage on this foresight never attains. Within Waters's personal notebooks, subsequently bequeathed to a scholarly repository where they have languished largely neglected, there exists a segment wherein an elder characterizes the omen not merely as a star. He portrays it as a phenomenon that would be observable by all peoples concurrently in every territory upon the selfsame evening. Pause to reflect upon that phrasing for a moment, preceding photography, preceding telegraphy, preceding any form of broadcast media. The assertion seen by all peoples simultaneously on the same night was not a verifiable proposition. The technological apparatus necessary to authenticate that every inhabitant of Earth witnessed an identical occurrence on a singular nocturnal interval did not emerge until the 20th century. Consequently, whoever formulated that precise depiction was either prognosticating a future wherein global simultaneous visibility could be confirmed, or else safeguarding a recollection of something so immense and so luminous that the ancestral transmission carried it onward as the most consequential celestial phenomenon in human remembrance. That particular datum has resided in that archive since Waters donated his field journals. No one has officially investigated it. 40 miles distant from where those discussions unfolded, there rises a geological feature denominated Prophecy Rock, an expanse of ruddy sandstone adjacent to the settlement of Old Oraibi, one of the longest continually inhabited communities in North America, occupied without rupture for over a millennium. Etched into that stone are glyphs that antedate any written documentation of their creators or their epoch. Among the imagery, an elongated horizontal line signifies a course. That course bifurcates into two diverging routes. Human figures advance toward a decision between them. Above that divergence, a ring, a stellar emblem. The Hopi maintain that these engravings are exceedingly old. No peer-reviewed investigation contradicts them, for no peer-reviewed investigation has ever been undertaken. Prophecy Rock has never been subject to exhaustive chronological assessment. The rock varnish, the darkened coating that accumulates on exposed sandstone across centuries, implies considerable antiquity. Yet rock varnish dating remains imprecise, and no formal scientific evaluation of the location has ever been disseminated in any academic periodical. This means that no one outside the Hopi community can presently assert with assurance when those carvings were executed. The star was already inscribed upon that rock when Waters arrived in 1958. It was already present when the earliest external investigators commenced documenting Hopi culture in the late 19th century. How long it had been there before that period remains unmeasured. Now, the particular chronology the elders delineated to Waters. Because the blue star is not an isolated emblem within Hopi tradition, it constitutes the terminal indicator in a progression. The elders described a succession of occurrences they termed the Great Purification, portents that would manifest in a prescribed order prior to the emergence into what they called the Fifth World. Each sign demarcating a phase, each phase propelling humanity nearer to the choice engraved into the stone at Old Oraibi. The blue star was the concluding sign, not the initial one. Not an early alert, but the summons that the decision had arrived. The elders who related this to Waters in 1958 were not speaking informally. They were transmitting something they recognized as safeguarded wisdom, conveyed through the clan structure across an indeterminate multitude of generations before it was ever committed to writing by an outsider. That variety of transmission does not transpire by happenstance. It transpires through purposeful institutional effort over centuries. The same deliberate endeavor that sustained the astronomical sophistication at Chaco Canyon, that preserved the calendrical ceremonial system, that maintained the sun-watching stations calibrated across generations of trained observers. The testimony exists in an archive in northern Arizona. The field notes exist. The rock carvings exist. The star emblem remains chiseled into prophecy rock above the forked pathway near Old Oraibi. What does not exist is any serious institutional engagement with what any of them actually describe. And the rationale for that absence of engagement is not what most individuals presume. It is not dramatic. It is not a confidential dossier, nor a sealed repository, nor an institutional conspiracy. It is something quieter and, in numerous respects, more potent. That is where this investigation proceeds next. Before anyone treats the blue star prophecy with gravity or dismisses it, there exists a foundational question that must be resolved first. Were the Hopi capable of serious astronomical expertise, not ceremonial ornamentation, not seasonal folklore, serious exaction, sustained celestial observation transmitted across generations with sufficient precision to still operate as intended today? The answer is documented, peer-reviewed, incontrovertible, and it fundamentally alters how the prophecy ought to be assessed. Chaco Canyon, the great houses erected there, identified by Hopi oral tradition itself as constructed by their own forebears during an earlier migratory epoch, are aligned to solar and lunar cycles with an exactitude that demanded sustained observation across multiple generations to calibrate. This is not interpretation. This is measured, published in peer-reviewed journals, accepted without controversy by mainstream archaeology. The sun dagger at Fajada Butte, a spiral petroglyph that marks solstices and equinoxes through the precise movement of light across the carving at specific times of year, required centuries of meticulous observation to devise. The geometry functions, it still operates today. A civilization capable of constructing that did not do so inadvertently. It demanded institutional knowledge. Trained observers transmitting accumulated data across generations with sufficient fidelity that the precision endured the transfer intact. If the people who built Chaco were monitoring celestial cycles at that level of accuracy centuries prior to European contact, the notion that their descendants preserved a specific prophecy linked to the future appearance of a star is not a leap into fantasy. It is the anticipated product of a tradition that had already demonstrated precisely that degree of sustained astronomical sophistication. Now, the Pleiades. Throughout Hopi ceremonial life, the star cluster known as the Pleiades holds a specific, well-documented role. It appears in Kachina ceremonies, in the timing of ritual observances, in oral tradition as a marker connected to origin, migration, and renewal. This is undisputed. It stands as one of the more thoroughly studied components of Hopi astronomy. Yet here is the detail almost nobody connects. Thousands of miles from Hopi territory, in the Hopewell burial mounds of the Ohio Valley, copper and mica ornaments recovered from sites dating back roughly 2,000 years repeatedly incorporate 7-point star motifs matching the Pleiades cluster within a completely separate archaeological tradition, separated from the Hopi by geography, by centuries, by every conventional boundary the migration timeline draws between them. Two unconnected traditions, both organizing sacred knowledge around the selfsame 7 stars. In any other discipline, that convergence would promptly generate a funded research question. In this field, it gets filed under coincidence and passed over without elaboration. Yet convergences like that do not manifest randomly. They manifest when two traditions share something more profound than the conventional timeline accounts for. A common astronomical heritage, a shared point of origin, a connection that the official migration models were not designed to accommodate. Now, the sun-watching stations, The Hopi maintained in physical observation points, specific locations from which trained watchers tracked the position of the sunrise against fixed landscape features across the full calendar year. Not occasionally, but continuously, as an institutional responsibility held by specific individuals whose role was passed down through particular family lineages. This determined planting times, ceremony schedules, and the precise timing of ritual observances that governed the entire agricultural and spiritual calendar of the community. This is applied astronomical science, institutional, precise, sustained across sufficient generations that the stations still function as devised. A tradition capable of maintaining that degree of observational precision across centuries is not a tradition that preserves astronomical knowledge casually. When the Hopi elders described a blue star that would appear as a specific signal at a specific moment, they were speaking from within a tradition that had already demonstrated it could track the sky with measurable precision across generations. The question is not whether they were capable. The capability is proven. The question is what exactly they said and why the institutions equipped to examine it have consistently declined to do so. Here is the answer hiding in plain sight. Archaeoastronomy, the academic discipline that studies ancient astronomical knowledge, operates on measurable, verifiable alignments. Sundaggers, solstice markers, geometric precision that can be photographed, calculated, and published. Prophecy resists that methodology by definition. An academic discipline built on falsifiable claims has no tidy framework for evaluating a tradition that states something will occur. It can study that the prophecy exists. It cannot, within its own protocols, study whether the prophecy is accurate. Consequently, the blue star gets filed under religious and cultural tradition, worthy of respect, not considered a testable historical assertion. Meanwhile, the astronomical sophistication that envelops it, that provides it context, that situates it within a tradition of serious, sustained sky watching across centuries, gets studied separately without ever being placed in the same chamber as the prophecy to which it belongs. The Chaco alignments in one category, the blue star in another, the Pleiades motifs in a third, never examined together, never asked what they are all indicating when held in the same frame. That separation is not accidental. It is the normal operation of institutional categories that were not designed for a body of knowledge that crosses every boundary they drew. Frank Waters was not an anthropologist. That single fact became the mechanism through which everything he documented in 1958 was quietly sidelined by the institutions that would otherwise have been obliged to examine it, not destroyed, not classified, set aside with the efficiency that only institutional indifference can produce. Waters was a novelist and independent researcher. His 1963 book was met with divided reception inside professional anthropology. Some praised it, a rare, respectfully gathered record of testimony almost never shared with outsiders at that level of detail. Others criticized it for blending genuine oral tradition with Waters's own literary interpretation, rendering it impossible to separate what the elders said from what the author shaped. That ambiguity gave institutional archaeology a clean exit, not because the testimony was false, but because the documentation method did not meet the standard required for serious academic engagement. The testimony exists. The pathway to examining it was closed before the book was published. Then the New Age movement arrived. Waters's book became enormously popular outside academic circles, folded into a framework that had nothing to do with what the elders told him in 1958. Ancient astronaut programming, lost civilization theories, frameworks that credentialed researchers cannot engage with without appearing to validate everything surrounding them. The Blue Star prophecy got swept into all of it. The prophecy itself had not changed. The context surrounding it had become toxic to anyone whose professional standing depended on credibility. This is how legitimate testimony gets buried, not through a classified file, but through proximity, through association, through a professional culture that cannot afford to be seen standing next to certain questions, regardless of whether those questions deserve to be asked. Waters's field notes, the actual words from those 1958 conversations, were donated to a university archive available to researchers, largely unexamined. The passage describing the star seen by all people at once in every land on the same night sits in those notes, unanalyzed, unfunded, unchallenged. Prophecy rock has never been the subject of a published dating study. Rock varnish analysis has been applied across the American Southwest. Not here. No grant written, no institution identified it as a priority. The Hopi Cultural Preservation Office has maintained a consistent position for decades. Certain knowledge is meant to be shared on Hopi terms, not extracted, tested, and returned stripped of the context that gives it meaning, not confirmation, not denial, a request for restraint. Skeptics read that silence as evidence there is nothing worth protecting. The other reading is what you would expect from a people who watched their children taken to boarding schools, designed to erase the oral transmission systems carrying this knowledge forward, who watched ceremonies suppressed, sacred objects catalogued as artifacts in institutions with no relationship to their meaning. A community that has watched what happens when indigenous knowledge enters the public domain without protective context, does not share that knowledge casually. The silence gets read by the outside world as absence of content rather than evidence of protection. The testimony is in the archive. The carvings are on the rock. The dating technology exists. And the pattern keeping all of it unexamined is not a decision made anywhere. It is the accumulated result of institutional categories, methodological standards, cultural contamination, and professional incentives that produce the same outcome as active suppression, without requiring anyone to have intended it. The knowledge stays where it was placed, waiting for a framework capable of holding it. There is one detail in the blue star prophecy that separates it from every other sign in the Great Purification sequence. Every other sign describes something observable within a limited geographic range. The blue star is different. Every land, every person, the same night. That is not the language of seasonal astronomy, not ceremonial timing, not local observation. It is the language of something so immense and so visible that the tradition preserved it as the defining celestial event in human memory. Now, the candidate nobody has formally examined, a supernova visible to the naked eye, bright enough to be seen in daylight, documented independently by civilizations on every inhabited continent, preserved in oral traditions from cultures with no contact with each other. The supernova of 1054 CE was recorded by Chinese astronomers, by Arab astronomers, and appears in rock art across the American Southwest, including sites the Hopi identify as their own ancestors' work. It was visible in daylight for 23 days. It appeared without warning. It was seen simultaneously across every inhabited continent on the same night. The Hopi tradition preserving a memory of something seen by all people at once, originating from a people whose ancestors documented the 1054 event in their own rock art. It is not a coincidence that can be set aside without explanation. Nobody has formally examined whether the blue star prophecy and the 1054 supernova are describing the same event from opposite ends of time, not because the question is unanswerable, but because nobody has placed both bodies of evidence in the same room. Here is the full picture. When everything is held together, the Chaco alignments established the ancestral Hopi were tracking the sky with measurable precision centuries before European contact. The Pleiades motif appearing identically in Hopi ceremony and Hopewell burial objects thousands of miles away establishes a convergence between separate traditions organizing knowledge around the same astronomical reference point. The 1958 testimony establishes a specific astronomical prophecy preserved in enough detail to identify its key characteristics. The seen by all at once detail establishes the prophecy describes a singular global event, not metaphor, not seasonal marker, a specific phenomenon of sufficient scale to be simultaneously visible across every inhabited continent. The 1054 supernova establishes that exactly such an event occurred within the ancestral Hopi occupation period, documented on every continent, appearing in rock art at sites the Hopi identify as their ancestors' work. 5 bodies of evidence, 5 separate institutional categories, never examined as a single unified question. Prophecy rock still stands near Old Oraibi, the carvings undated, the star still carved above the split path. Waters's field notes still in the archive, available, largely unread. The 1054 supernova records sitting in Chinese and Arab archives alongside southwestern rock art. The Hopi oral tradition still held within the community, still transmitted, still protected. The question of whether those 5 bodies of evidence are describing the same event from 5 different directions has never been formally asked by anyone with the institutional standing to pursue it. The sky above Old Oraibi looks the same tonight as it did in 1958. The star the elders described, seen by all people at once, may have already appeared 11 centuries ago. And the tradition that preserved the memory of it has been waiting ever since for someone to recognize what they were actually looking at.